You are listening to Woodland Walks, a podcast for the Woodland Trust, presented by Adam Shaw. We protect and plant trees for people to enjoy, to fight climate change and to help wildlife thrive.
Today's guest, well, he wasn't a politician, but he was one of the most influential people in politics in the 90s and early 2000s as Tony Blair's friend and his director of communications. He is Alastair Campbell. Amongst many other things, he has busked his way around the world playing the bagpipes. He's worked for the Daily Mirror. He is a fan of open water swimming and Burnley FC. He's written a number of books, mainly political diaries. His latest one has just hit the shelves. It's called The Rise and Fall of the Olympic Spirit. But he's also written about mental health and his own experience of depression in Living Better: How I Learned to Survive Depression. Well, I met him for a walk amongst the trees of Parliament Hill in London to talk trees, nature, mental health and how they're all connected.
I've definitely, in the last few years, I've become much more conscious of, certainly of trees, and the tree of the day thing has taken on a life of its own. It's just, I'll tell you the story. So I've always liked countryside. I've always liked nice scenery, even as a kid. I mean, I didn't appreciate it as much then as now, but I've always had that sense of being in nice countryside. And then what happened a couple of years ago, it was when the People's Vote campaign sort of lost, basically. And Georgia Gould, she's actually the local council leader now, but more than that for us, she's the daughter of Philip Gould, who was my best friend in politics, who died a few years ago. And she knew that with the campaign sort of going belly up, that I'd be looking for a new sort of, cause or fight or something. So she arrived just before Christmas with a pile of books about trees and about the environment and what have you, and included the Peter Vollenbohm group. I always get his name wrong. Vollenben, the German guy, the Hidden Life of Trees, and that was the first book I read, and it just made me think about it differently. And then I just started taking pictures, and then I thought, well, that's nice, I'll post that. So I posted it, and then I just noticed there was a different sort of, often a different sort of person with a different sort of response to the stuff that I mainly post, which is, usually about politics. And often quite kind of, raging and what have you. And people, I think, noticed that the trees were a very different thing. And then I'd have to look and see when I actually started sort of formalising it as tree of the day. And now it's so ridiculous. You get people saying, they want to know what the judging criteria are, and is there a panel? And I'm saying, no, it's me. I see a tree, I like it. You get hundreds of people, and they'll say things like, oh, you call that a tree? This is a tree. And it'll be somebody in Australia or Jamaica or Bulgaria. And it's just sort of taken on a life of its own. Because the thing about it is, I don't particularly, I'm somebody who, I don't particularly want to be an expert on it. Because what I like is just I like the kind of effect that they have. And I think it's different if you go around and think, oh, that's an oak and that's a birch and that's a hawthorn and that's a this and that's a that. That's fine, but it's kind of not why I do it. Yeah. And the other thing that I find interesting is, you take that tree there, some days that tree looks completely different. That is a previous winner, but it was the light that made it win. You sometimes see trees that remind you of people and situations. Might be a shape, might be something that's happening around the tree.
So how much is this connection with trees related to mental health and your experiences of that?
Put it this way, I'm very like this, I'm very conscious of the fact that when I'm not feeling great, that I've got enough kind of experience in the bank, in the kind of memory bank, to know that if I get out, it's likely I'm going to end up feeling a bit better. Right. And I found myself recently when I found my mood dipping, and not necessarily being out and about in the house or whatever, and I'll just sort of sit there and I can close my eyes and I can take myself back there a little bit, and I call it bathing in memory of nice scenery.
You were working in Downing Street. I can't imagine you had much time to wander in the woods, actually, did you?
I didn't, but so for example, I used to run to work a lot, and I would find a way of running that I avoided. So if I go from where I live, I can get to Primrose Hill, through Regent's Park, then you've got a little bit of road, then I can get into Hyde Park, St James's Park, so I could be in a lot of, open spaces, and it wasn't that I was certainly not as conscious of it as I am now, but I think there was a reason why I was choosing to try and find as much, park space to run through. And then I remember as well, during the Northern Ireland peace negotiations, I can remember Hillsborough Castle, where we used to stay, which is like the government's, the Queen's residence there, and there's some fantastic, it's got a really beautiful garden, like a big garden. And I can remember a couple of times just when feeling, you need to get out and clear your head a bit, and either going just and sitting down, I don't know what they were, but there were these two enormous trees just at the back of the house, and just going and sitting and sort of thinking, and so it wasn't certainly not as conscious as I am now, but I think it was always buried away in there, and that sense of needing that sort of space. And you talk about mental health. I remember when I had my first breakdown in the 80s, and I ended up in hospital, and I can remember when I first started to feel a sense of recovery. It's quite interesting. It was up in Scotland. Fiona came up. I was in hospital for a while, and they let me out, and we headed back to London, got a plane, and landed at Heathrow, and I said, I can't face going into London. And I ended up going down to the West Country, stayed with a friend of ours, Sid Young, he's sadly dead now, but he had this wonderful house out in the countryside in Somerset, in a little tiny village. And I'm sure part of it was just going somewhere where there was, greenery and water and trees and all that. So I've always had that sense of nature being a healer. And then, you've seen it in this wretched pandemic. I mean, this, even though it's rainy now, this is
busy.
Still quite busy.
Yeah.
It's like some days it's like just incredibly busy.
I have to say, I always thought that depression was a sort of extreme sadness. And after reading your book, I think I got that wrong. I got that very wrong. So what is it? What is depression if it's not just a word for feeling very sad?
You're not very wrong. In that when you're depressed. Now this is the tree. Shall I just tell you the story here?
So we're by a fallen tree, it sweeps in the air.
Yeah. In this, one of my favourite parts of the Heath. Yeah. I don't know if you got to this bit in the book yet, but there's a bit where I talk about Fiona and I were out walking on the Heath, and I start punching myself in the face.
Yeah.
Right, that was here.
Right.
And that was, the only reason I remember that is because of this tree.
Right.
But I sometimes come here if I'm feeling not great, simply to tell myself and to assure myself I'm not feeling as bad as I did then. And the other thing the reason for this is important is because this was upturned during the storm in 1987, which was the night that our first son was born. All this stuff sort of, it all sort of builds in, and the reason why that episode was so important, it was 2005, that I was punching myself, was because that was the moment I realised I've been trying to deal with this all my life on my own, and I've got to go and get proper help, because it was intolerable for me, but I could see the fear in Fiona's eyes, and I just thought, I've got to go and sort this out. So Fiona obviously knows my moves very, very well, and she's very good at sort of, gently persuading me that if I do, rather than stay in bed, if I do get up and I do go out, and we do take the dog out, I will feel better. Now, I don't always, but often I do.
People talk about being depressed. They throw around that word quite lightly. I wonder if you feel aggrieved about that there's a sort of a difference between being sad and being depressed, and perhaps we use that word too flippantly, too lightly.
That's a really good question. I mean, I don't begrudge it. I think people what I don't like is when people use the language of mental health when they don't mean it. The one that I really hate is when people talk about, you get it again in football, game of two halves, it's a very schizophrenic performance. Schizophrenia does not mean split personality. It doesn't mean you've got two minds. No, I think, look, when I'm depressed, I'm sad, right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of more than that. It's like, if somebody close to you dies, you're sad.
Yeah.
But that's a sadness that has an explanation and an understanding. Of course, that might trigger a depression. The depression, for me, the cloud, as you rightly say, I've got this cloud that sort of, I can see it, it's got a colour, it's got a texture, it's got a shape, and I used to resist it. I'd say, I'd fight it, go away, leave me alone, and now I just think, oh, bloody hell, you always win, so come on, in you come. And then there's like this physical sensation, and that's when I feel it becomes a depression. It's when the physical sensation of this thing inside you that's like a, and some people call it, I often say it's like a sort of, you feel like lead is being injected into your veins. Other people talk about, they feel that the light is being taken out of them.
I remember you writing about an early boss of yours who called you when you were hospitalised with depression, and the nurse wheeled in a telephone to your bedside, you picked it up, and he said, "I hear you've gone mad." Now you tell that as quite a darkly funny story. Is there humour at a time like that? Is there humour in all of that depression?
It's funny because Grace, our daughter, is a comedian, and it's like we have these discussions about what you can laugh at and what you can't laugh at. I think you have to try to be able to laugh at everything. At the time, I think he was using humour to signal to me that it wasn't a problem.
Yes.
But yeah, that was one of those conversations that sort of stayed in my mind for a long time, because it was just, he was phoning to say, don't worry about it, whatever's happened has happened, and you can come back here whenever.
You were an immensely influential figure in politics, but it also strikes me that you were a bit like a functioning alcoholic, because at the same time that you were very depressed, you were right at the heart of government, but surprisingly, I think it didn't seem to make you ineffective, that depression. So how were you able to park that problem outside number 10 Downing Street?
Yeah, but I don't. The first thing I say is that I couldn't do it on my own. I don't think you do park it. It's an interesting thought, that whether you park it or whether you somehow power through it. I mean, it's interesting when The Living Better, the book we're talking about, when that came out, and Tony Blair read it, and there's Tony that I was working with every day, talking to several times a day, seeing several times a day, and he said, God, I had no idea it was so bad. And the reason was that it wasn't that I was parking it, but I was managing it better at work, knowing that, if you like, my safety net, my safety place in a way, was home, and then when I got home I'd just crash. And that's, I think, why it became so difficult for Fiona in particular, because she was having to kind of lift that burden and also get the, feel like it was her fault, because she'd say, well, you go to work and you're fine, Tony phones and you can talk to him and it's fine. Some poxy news journalist that you don't really like phones and you can be perfectly polite. And then the minute the phone call's over, you're back on the sofa lying there sort of saying life's not worth living. So I think it is harder for people who are, she's written a chapter at the end about what it's like for her. And it's really interesting how big a response that chapter has had from people who say there's nothing out there to help people who are living with people with mental health problems.
In your book about mental health, you engage with this question, I think, about whether mental health problems were a drag on your achievements or perhaps even bizarrely part of the reason for those achievements.
I think my view is that I like to try and see it as a positive. I think a lot of my energy comes from when I'm on the wrong end of the scale. Some of the most creative work I've ever done has been when I've been emerging from a depression. I think the fact now that I write so much about it and talk so much about it, I take that as a good thing, which I wouldn't be able to do if I didn't have the experience.
Given that mental health history is really part of you, part of your achievements and your failures, if you could wave a magic wand and you'd never have had those problems, would you wave it?
I think so, but I'm hesitant because, again, Fiona would tell you, one of my pathological fears is boredom. Now, do the mood swings make life a bit more challenging and more interesting? I do like to be challenged.
Yeah.
But I think so. I think if you said, wave this wand and you'll never get a howling, painful depression again, I think I'd wave it. Stephen Fry, by the way, when he was asked that very same question about pressing a red button and his bipolar would go, he said no in the end, because he felt it was so much part of him. And I get that as well. But yeah, I think at this stage of my life I would. I'm 63 now. If you said I could get to the end of my life without it ever happening, I think I'd buy that.
I think we veered away. I've pushed you away a bit from this core subject of nature and trees at times on this walk. So let's bring us back to that, and in particular sort of nature and mindfulness. You talk about how one psychiatrist made you stare at a single raisin, for a very long time. And that was about sort of appreciating the world around you, taking time. Can you explain that process and why that might be helpful, useful for others?
Well, the exercise, which at the time I thought was just silly, but he sort of made me persevere with it, and I ended up understanding better why it wasn't silly and why it did seem to have an effect, was basically just to put a raisin, and he kind of I got a sun-made raisin out of a box, and just put it in your hand, the palm of your hand, and just kind of watch it, and then, roll it about and what have you. And after a while, once I got into it, I started to see how complicated it was, the different shapes, the different contours, and it just got me thinking in a different way. And where it led me in the end was to a place of saying, well, who's more important in the world, me or that raisin? And you might want to think you,
yes.
But we could sort of we could take that little bud there, right? And we could have an interesting discussion about what that bud's going to do with the rest of its existence, whether it's going to be here longer than we are, whether it's going to grow and develop more than we do. So it's that kind of process that it took me down. And I don't know why, but it sort of, I kind of felt quite comforted by it at a time when I was, very, very low.
And has that renewed approach, that renewed sort of appreciation of nature or mindfulness of the environment in which you operate, sort of made a difference when you go for a walk and what you notice?
Yeah, I think so. I'm still not very good at it. I'm still always, no, I'm better than I was, right? I'm better at living in the moment, but I still am usually, there's a part of my mind that is usually always kind of forward and thinking about the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But I'm a lot better, and I'm more conscious of how much better you're likely to feel if you can do that thing of being in the moment. I do think during COVID, people have got to, say like people living here, I've never ever seen the Heath as busy as it's been. I think people have got that deeper sense developing of the importance of the natural world, and that, that hopefully will actually lead to a good place politically.
They're important indicators, aren't they? They mark a change.
Exactly. Yeah. They will be influenced, I think, by that sense of people wanting to feel this world is going to be around a lot longer, and people have got a much better understanding than they have of the importance of trees to that. It's not that long ago, if you think of the sort of historical sweep, when, tree hugger was used as a kind of term of abuse. And Prince Charles was seen as a complete eccentric because he talked about, talking to the plants and all that stuff. And now, it's kind of, like I was saying to you, the response I get to the tree of the day thing, I'm not saying it's just that these are straws in the wind that is blowing in a different direction.
Now, you've also got a book which will be on the shelves, a new book which will be on the shelves as this podcast comes out. Let's just tell me a bit about that.
Well, that's the latest volume of diaries, 2010 to 2015. So I kept a diary the whole time I was in politics, and I still do. And we're up to volume 8, 2010 to 2015. I call it the rise and fall of the Olympic spirit. I call it because I do think that 2012 was kind of a real sense of a high point in what it meant to be British, and I just feel now we're in a, as you say, very polarised world. There has been a sort of sense of community coming back in some ways, and then a lot of personal stuff as well, a lot of my own stuff. My son Callum, he sort of developed alcoholism during that period. That was pretty grim. That was another interesting one. I talked about, when he finally realised he had to get help, and we got him into this place up in Scotland. And again, I think not for nothing are these really good rehab places set in in nature, because you get that sense. I remember there was a day, it was actually the day Margaret Thatcher died. I remember Fiona and I were up there, and I was just, I was getting lots of messages, would I do interviews and blah, blah, blah. And so that's how I knew that she died. And we were out in this little wood at the back of the place where he was, just kind of, walking around, having a chat and what have you. And it's funny how those, well, I say funny, I think it's very apt that, I remember thinking about my own place when I was in hospital in the 80s, that, going out for a walk, fresh air, green fields, trees, water, that was where I first started to feel a sense of, recovery.
Well, we're almost at the bench where we met, so one final question. You clearly achieved a lot so far. You've gone through a lot. Do you have other plans? What's next?
Actually, but I'd say the stuff I'm doing in the mental health arena is where I want to do most. I actually do think that changing the way that people think and talk and act in relation to mental health, I think that is a big campaign and a big cause, and I think it's working. I think we're definitely in a different place, but I think there's a long way to go. That's what occupies a lot of my time at the moment, but there'll be other things along the way.
Well, look, I'm really grateful for the time you've spared today. It's been a great walk. It's been a great chat. Thank you very much indeed.
Not at all, enjoyed it. My pleasure, my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Woodland Trust Woodland Walks. Join us next month when Adam will be taking another walk in the company of Woodland Trust staff, partners and volunteers. And don't forget to subscribe to the series on iTunes or wherever you're listening to us, and do give us a review and a rating. And why not send us a recording of your favourite woodland walk to be included in a future podcast? Keep it to a maximum of 5 minutes, and please tell us what makes your woodland walk special. or send us an email with details of your favourite walk and what makes it special to you. Send any audio files to podcast@woodlandtrust.org.uk, and we look forward to hearing from you.